So we're getting leaks again. We're getting more talk of the Switch 2. And it's very interesting is the fact that they talk to some random folks or sources that work at Nvidia, and there was some interesting information that's come out. I wanted to talk about it, and I wanted to give my thoughts. I don't know how much of it is true, but if any of it is true, I don't look for the Switch 2 to be all that impressive. And if it's not all that impressive, I think that's a bad thing. I think Nintendo, it sounds like Nintendo's just basically waited too goddamn long to announce and release a new console. Partly because of everything being held back. What I'm picturing happening, and it's going to be a shame if it does happen, is I picture the Switch 2 failing. It's going to fail. And Nintendo's going to scramble to, and if Nintendo was smart, they would do whatever they can to help the Switch 2 in its current state sell better, like they did with the 3DS. The 3DS didn't take off immediately. They had to do things for it to be a success, um, and eventually it did become a success. But when it comes to this next console, my opinion is try and make it work. And if you can't, don't assume you did the wrong thing. You didn't do the wrong thing. You just didn't make it more, you didn't make it capable enough. And that's what it's sounding like to me. Like they're not making a capable enough device. So I was looking over some stuff about the Switch 2. This is from PC Guide. I find it funny that PC Guide, a website about computers, is talking about a game console and not desktop computers. Um, so, ugh, felt like I want to sneeze. Uh, something called Moore's Law is dead. They talked. There was talks to Matt from Elderon Games on the console and the updates that are expected from it. Already provides an insight into the problems of the original console and how the second coming can improve upon it. They confirm the expectation that the Switch 2 could more or less be on par with the Steam Deck, that heads the handheld field and might bring Nintendo back into the talks, considering considering it was released over 7 years ago now. It might also help with the development side of things to introduce this new version. As Matt talks about in the podcast, the current Switch can be problematic as the old specs do limit what can be achieved on it. He mentions how you only get 3 gigabytes of accessible RAM shared between the CPU and GPU. That's not good. That's not enough for shit. And that's one of Nintendo's problems. They need to realize you can't make anything work that well on modern devices and modern gaming like they did in the old days. Like they would use just very little, or they would use as much as they need, and they didn't give a shit about what the third parties were saying were necessary. 3 gigabytes of accessible memory that's shared between the CPU and GPU is ridiculous. That leads to the potential of out of memory crashes caused, as Elderon talked, of happening with their game. So hopefully the Switch 2 release should solve that issue. So there were two sources from NVIDIA that were talked to, and source one says, I'm not that close to the project, but I can say that Samsung 8, what does 8nm stand for? I don't know what that is. I don't know what 8nm is, but is a perfect match for Nintendo. It's the lowest cost transistor node on the market, and it's not expected to be as competitive for capacity as more modern nodes over the next few years. Also, remember that with 128-bit LPDDR5, Nintendo could realistically choose 8 gigabytes, 12 gigabytes, or 16 gigabyte capacities for the SoC we designed for them. So they designed an SoC for them. If Nintendo is smart, they will go to 16 gigabytes. Put 16 gigs of memory in there. Don't mess with this. Do that. It needs as much RAM as possible. Don't fuck around with this, Nintendo. I hope to God you're smart enough. So Source 2 talks a little bit more about the chipset that was worked on. So he goes, to be honest, the Switch 2 isn't really on my radar anymore. Right now, I am focused on finishing up validation for Blackwall. I don't know what Blackwall is. I have no idea. Switch 2 Silicon has been done since late 2022. So they finished that up 2 years ago. So Nintendo has been waiting this goddamn long to release a new piece of hardware. They have this horrible habit of sitting back and going, let's wait until things start to get sluggish and hardware starts to struggle in sales, because you have to realize that Nintendo likes to make a profit on their hardware, which I think is fucking retarded. Okay, I think out of all the companies, they would benefit from releasing hardware for as low a price as possible. That way they can sell even more software. So releasing hardware that's at a price that gives them profit is dumb. I think they need to maybe not sell it at a loss. I wouldn't sell it at a loss, but I would sell it at just enough to where it's cheap enough for the for people to buy it. It's for the consumer. It's cheap. It's affordable enough for the consumer, but it it's not so expensive that because they want to make a profit off the hardware. So, in other words, they're not losing money on it, but they're not getting money on it either. I would try and find that middle ground, because I do believe they'll make a lot of money off of software. All right. So they had it done in late 2022. Late 2022, so yeah, I want to say, well, no, if it was late 2022, then that means it was only a little bit over a year. I don't think it's quite 2 years. Quite 2 years. So doesn't sound too bad. So as far as I'm aware, that Digital Foundry article looking at the T239 processor that leaked from when we were hacked is an almost entirely correct summary of what's true about the Silicon in the Switch 2. We presented several options to Nintendo, including one that utilized Lovelace, and they basically selected a cost-optimized version of Orin. It has some efficiency tweaks from Lovelace and a few other goodies added as well. Oh, and AMD bid against us hard for the Switch 2, by the way, but ended up losing the bid. Wow, so that's interesting. That's very interesting. So AMD really wanted to bid with Nintendo. They really wanted to work on a Nintendo hardware. But I would worry about that. I would worry about AMD, because AMD does for the other two consoles already. And there's more of a risk of what Nintendo works on slipping and getting to the competition. So it's probably best that the competition doesn't have much of an idea of what's going on with Nintendo's next hardware. Keep in mind, Nintendo is constantly developing. Like, even once the Switch 2 comes out, they're already well ahead of planning. In fact, they've probably already been well ahead of planning for a new piece of hardware. If I were Nintendo moving forward, I would just keep making more powerful iterations, if possible, and not focus as much on their gimmicks and features, and instead focus on something capable. And I do hope that they fix the drift, the stick drift. I think the analog stick drift is a huge issue. Mine drifts. I gotta find somebody to work on it for me, or I gotta find the part and work on it myself. But either way, the drift on my Switch is on my analog stick on my Joy Cons is bad. The fact that we kept calling it stick drift, or not stick drift, but Joy-Con drift was stupid. Don't call it. It's not the Joy-Con itself drifting. It's not motion controls drifting. It's analog stick drift, which is a thing that's been around for a long time. I hope they got that, figured out. I hope they got it sorted. So on par with the Steam Deck, but limited by Nintendo. The specs leaked of the Switch 2 should put it on par with the Steam Deck, but the supposed weaker single core CPU performance may impact its capabilities. As previously said, it might be a stretch to compare the two. That might come from Nintendo's choice in the security systems inside of the thing, with software limiting its potential. The manufacturer includes security processors and encryption, introducing limitations and slower work of the Switch. Yeah, they're trying really hard to keep people from hacking their hardware and everything and doing illegal shit and figuring out how to make emulators and stuff. Nintendo is desperately trying to prevent that. Um, it might just be another way Nintendo is trying to cut down on any hacking and emulation that could be seen on the original handheld. Yep, 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 yep. But in the process of doing that, if it hinders their hardware, that's a bad idea. That's a very bad idea. But yeah, if the current limitations are also introduced, combined it can really hinder the performance even with these improved specs. That currently includes the system limiting how much data the game cannot write too much data to prevent flash storage from wearing out and limits the patch sizes too. Uh, but the leaked specs should still give it a lot more to work with. It has a 128-bit LPDDR5 fast memory to go with, which also allows it to work with 8, 12, and 16-bit capacities for it, alongside being an NVIDIA Ampere processor. It should allow it to run modern graphics and potentially ray tracing, but probably the ability to use DLSS might be the most important for the handheld. Yes. So here's the thing about DLSS. It can take imaging. It can take the imagery that you're seeing and it can do a sort of upscaling to the visuals that make it look more intense than the visuals actually are. Okay, so it can make something that's maybe only 1080, not even 1080p. It could take an image that's like it can make something 480p look like 1080p. Do you see what I'm saying? It can make something 480p look like 1080p. It can make something that looks 1080p look like 4K. But it's not actually 4K. It's just made to look that way. We're going to see how this works. Here's my question, though. There's a lot of games and a lot of developers who are making games that are still pixely looking. If you don't want to upscale the image and have it look smudgy or do any other weird thing, I wonder if you can opt out of using that. If your game doesn't require it because it's meant to look like low resolution, old school graphics, then it should be able to say, nah, we're not going to use DLSS. We're opting out of that. We don't need it for our game. I wonder about things like that. So apparently that's the entire thing right there. Moore's Law is dead. What the hell is Moore's Law is dead? The hell kind of name it? Oh, it's a YouTube. Oh, okay. Okay. Can we like skip ahead of that real quick? Let's skip ahead of that. I want to skip ahead to Nintendo Switch 2 analysis. Future proof for AAA. Yeah, let's go to that.
Hoping people will upgrade, I actually want to talk to you about the Nintendo Switch a little bit here too, because it's another thing this jump in a league that it seems has been corroborated. The Nintendo Switch 2 is supposed to have 12 or 16 gigabytes of RAM. At this point, it sounds like it's probably 12. It uses.
Yeah, so if they were smart enough, like I said, they would go with 16 gigs. Nintendo, if you are smart, that or they can potentially they could release an improved version, kind of like what they did with the 3DS when they released the new 3DS. They could release another better version down the road that does use more memory if they want to. So it's not out of the question. But I'm pretty sure that would create issues for developers and probably consumers as well. But if they're smart, they'll go with 16 gigabytes of RAM from the get go. 16 gigs, Nintendo. Don't be stupid. Don't be stupid. Give it as much memory as possible for the developers to use for the games. If the more memory you have, the more you can let developers use for their games, and the more there is that can be used just to, even just to run the system. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, no, yeah.
Basically kind of an Ampere plus graphics architecture with 12 SMs, meaning that in docked mode it should get to over 4 teraflops. It should give you, once you factor in DLSS, an Xbox Series S like experience, granted with a slower CPU than with this.
Yeah, that slower CPU is a bad idea. But at the same time, here's the thing about the CPU. Maybe there would be like an overclock for it for when it's docked. I wonder about that. If it's docked and it has decent cooling, they could possibly overclock it just a little. That's a thought that's going through my head right now. Could it be overclocked?
Series S has. In docked mode, from what I've heard, they're targeting around 5 watts or less. So I think it's going to be way throttling down. And when you
Why? Other than power, and juice, why? I can't understand this for the life of me. Why is Nintendo so averse, what is that wording? I think that's the wording. To 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 power, to having a device that's powerful, other than keeping the battery from draining too quickly. I just, I don't understand. I really don't. There are phones right now you can get that are super powerful, super capable. So then I wonder why this approach. I don't know.
put it in the dock, a fan.
Oh, and laptops too. There are laptops that, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's to keep it from overheating too. Maybe there's something we don't know. But again, if they put enough memory into this, if they put at least 16 gigs, it could probably help with this. Having enough memory is important. Not everything is reliant on CPU and GPU. And then on top of all of that, we have the the API. The API is very important. Graphics APIs are very important. When we talk about technology, we never really talk about the software side of technology or the firmware side of technology. And when we speak of firmware, we need to look at things such as OpenGL, Vulkan, which Nintendo is actually a contributor to Vulkan, I think, or maybe not a contributor, but they're on like the they're kind of part of the group. What is that group called that basically runs Vulkan? But yeah, they paid into that basically. Vulkan, for those of you who don't know, is an API much similar to very similar to DirectX. The difference being that the Vulkan API is something that can be freely used everywhere, and DirectX is Microsoft only. Like, you can only use it on Windows. It's ridiculous. It is so, well, only on Windows and only on Xbox, which is just, yeah. And there are companies right now, especially Steam, with the Steam Deck, where they're using Vulkan to translate information for DirectX, the latest DirectX, in order to make those games run. Because a lot of games are just not made to run on Linux or anything like that. They're strictly for and it's not the same as emulation. I don't want people to get confused about that. But that's why I get so frustrated when I'm watching people like Review Tech USA sit there, and he don't talk about tech as much anymore. But he used to sit there and he focused so much on raw hardware power. And when we think about the capabilities of anything video game wise, you also have to look at the firmware. You have to look at APIs. Graphic APIs are very important. APIs in general are very important because the right API is going to really help when in conjunction with your hardware. If the wrong API, it's not good. So for people to sit here, like Review Tech USA, and he don't, like I said, he don't talk tech anymore. I haven't heard him talk tech in a long time. But when he did, he ignored all of this. Back when the Switch came out, there was these games being ported. I don't understand how they're being ported. Vulkan API is how they're being ported. And it was something I kept trying to fucking tell his goddamn ass. And he's so hard-headed. He's very hard-headed. He's a bit of a know-it-all, and it's very frustrating when you try to just, fill him in on some information he's missing out on. And he just doesn't want to listen. That frustrates me about a lot of YouTubers. When we talk about technology, it's not just hardware side, and it's not just GPU side either. Memory helps play a part in everything. When you have enough memory to help shuffle things around, it makes a game run better. It makes it, not chug as much. Do you see what I'm saying? And I know this from experience. The less memory I'm using on a computer trying to play a game, and I've been down this road before, the more it chugs. And the more memory I would have, the less a game would chug for me. The less it would jump around, the less it would stutter. So yeah, it's very important to look at APIs. And the Vulkan API is, I can guarantee you, going to be very much part of this hardware. The Vulkan API can do a ray tracing like thing. And I don't think people are familiar with that either. But let's keep going.
Turns on or something. But I wonder what you think about that. Going from this, 256 CUDA core Maxwell GPU in the Switch to something that will have, 1536 CUDA cores, I believe, running at way higher clock speeds, at least in docked mode with, 3 or 4 times the RAM on board. How would you characterize how you and maybe other developers think about porting to the Switch now? Are you guys eager for a Switch 2 launch? And the specs I just described, does that make you excited? Does that make you feel like Nintendo, if not shooting for the moon at all, is at least taking future-proofing somewhat seriously with this generation?
Yeah, the current Switch is probably being our most problematic platform for porting because
I can't understand this dude that just started talking. What is that accent? That is a thick, maybe it's British sounding. I don't know. I'm spittling a lot. I've got a lot of mouth fluid today.
I believe running at way higher clock speeds, at least in docked mode with 3 or 4 times the RAM on board. How would you characterize how you and maybe other developers think about porting to the Switch now? Are you guys eager for a Switch 2 launch? And the specs I just described, does that make you excited? Does that make you feel like Nintendo, if not shooting for the moon at all, is at least taking future-proofing somewhat seriously with this generation?
Yeah, the current Switch is probably being our most problematic platform for porting.
Oh, it's probably been our most problematic platform for porting. I see. It sounds British, but he sounds like he has sort of a speech impediment along with the British accent. So it's a little hard to understand him.
Because really, you only get 3 gigs of accessible RAM, right?
Wow. Yeah, so that whole thing I just read was true. 3 gigs. What the fuck was Nintendo thinking? That's not enough for shit. That's not enough. That's why I'm sitting here going 16 gigs, Nintendo. If you're smart, you'll put 16 gigs in there.
If it's shared between the CPU and the GPU, if you're comparing your PS5 Pro RAM versus a PC, you're not factoring in that your 4090's got its own, chunk of RAM, right? So I think RAM count should be higher on these devices if they haven't got a dedicated GPU, right? Because you don't really.
Yeah. So there is a graphics chip in the Switch, as far as I know. And on a computer, you have the memory on the GPU, but then you also have the system memory, and both are kind of separate. That's why you can pull off so much on a lot of, actually not even just PC, but other consoles that currently exist. So there's plenty of memory to go around for everything that has to be done. So it's very important, and the fact that Nintendo doesn't seem to take this shit seriously. They're still in a bubble. They're still in the past. Nintendo doesn't get how things have progressed and changed, and they don't seem to understand how frustrating it is for these developers when you don't give them enough resources.
They get to use all that as a developer. But for the Switch base mobile, I mean, we're already getting out of RAM crashes. People with an iPhone 15 Pro are like, how could my iPhone run the game better than a Switch? I feel like it should be higher, right? Or whatever.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing. I just mentioned that earlier, too. I said that, you know, there's a lot of phones that are more capable than the Switch. And there are games that you can see on an iPhone or whatever that run really well, and the Switch is struggling. Nintendo, I hope you are taking fucking notes. I don't think they are. I don't think they care, but they need to care. They need to take care, and they need to take it seriously. Nintendo, if you're smart, 16 gigs of memory, you need to have that, of RAM. I'm not talking storage. I'm talking about what helps it function.
Right, or even like an iPhone. Someone have an iPhone 8, and they'll be like, you know, I can get 60 FPS on my iPhone. The Switch can barely pull 30.
Yeah, that's crazy. That is so crazy. God damn, it's crazy.
What's going on, right? And I think users at least need to have something. I guess I compare it to like how close to the Steam Deck or the Asus ROG Ally are they going to get? Are they going to get like half a Steam Deck, right? In terms of
the way I've characterized it is, if you think about it, it'll have 12 SMs. The Steam Deck has 8 compute units. Well, so think about it. That's Ampere versus RDNA 2.
So let's stop for a second. Look on this guy's desk right here. I don't know if anybody can see that. Let me bump this forward. He's got I think it's an ROG Ally or an A&Neo in there or something. He's got something up there that is way more capable than the Switch, I can guarantee you. And it's kind of sad how Nintendo sat. They sat on it. They wait too goddamn long to put out new hardware. That other people come out with something similar and they manage to exceed Nintendo. Now, price is going to matter, so let's try and keep that in mind. So,
if you look at how the graphics cards performed in that generation, basically who had more SMs pretty much won. I think, even if I'm remembering correctly, like, didn't the RTX 3090, let me look this up, is that one traded blows with the 6900 XT? We have here, let me see the number of SMs. Because I thought it was like, it was 82. So 82 versus RDNA 2 is 80. 3090 was kind of stronger. So it's pretty equal. So the Switch 2 should have 12 SMs. The Steam Deck has 8. So it should have a better GPU. And when you factor in DLSS, maybe in some situations much better. Now the CPU, the way it was described to me by people at NVIDIA is in pure multi-threading. It's ARM CPU, has more core. It's probably about the same as the Steam Deck, but that's in pure multi-threading. And single threading, it's definitely not going to as easily hit 60 hertz. No one thinks that the Steam Deck is a 60 hertz device, really, anyways. So
yeah, like I kind of hit like 45 FPS in my game on kind of like medium high or whatever with something.
You also have to consider the operating system that's doing any sort of lifting in the background. And it's the Steam Deck is using, and they do a pretty good job, don't get me wrong, but the Steam Deck currently, in its current state, is like, it does well enough, but that's because they've optimized the hell out of the Steam OS that it uses. And I'm pretty sure they're continuing to try and optimize things quite a bit. I have a friend who I talk to now and then who has a Steam Deck and he loves it. And he does have some issues with it. And hey, Chad, by the way, I don't know if you're watching, dude. But, yeah.
Down on Steam Deck, and ROG Ally can just do lot 60, everything on anything. So
right.
I imagine yeah, if it's, you know, close compared to the Steam Deck, I think it will work out. I think though by the time it releases and by the time developers want stuff, Steam Deck's probably going to be a bit ahead, right? But for Nintendo, traditionally they don't care about specs. They don't care about, it's about software, right? And the one for
you have to give about specs. You have to care about specs. Because if you don't give a shit about your specs, you're not going to get the software you want to have. And third party matters. Third party matters like you wouldn't believe. All right, it matters. Third party, second party. You can't just sit there and make hardware just for you, and then tell third party, well, you'll just, if you really want to use it, you'll make it work. You can't get cocky. You can't get full of yourself. You know, we've seen companies that way before. They'll come off of the success of one piece of hardware going into another piece of hardware, and dear God, they become very anti-consumer and everything. They do all the wrong things. That's what happened with the PlayStation 3. They thought if they made it hard, which is really ridiculous. Why would you make it harder? They thought the PS3 making it harder to program for would, after coming off the success of the PS2, would make, you know, it would put them in a top position. Developers would be too busy on their hardware to work on the competition. Oh, that didn't work out at all for Sony, because they didn't consider the fact that nobody was going to pay $600 fucking at the time. At the time, no one was going to pay $600 fucking on the new hardware. So if you can't sell the hardware to consumers, you know, and you have competition who's selling for a less expensive price for their hardware, well, duh, you're going to lose out to that competing hardware. They lost out that generation to Microsoft because of their stupidity. Now, of course, Microsoft got cocky after that, and the next Xbox that came out at the time was like, they had all this weird shit that nobody gave a shit about. I don't know if it was DRM or whatever. Always on DRM and shit like that. It's just, at the time, no. I mean, I still hate DRM. I hate DRM. I hate always online shit. I hate games that are only online. I prefer to play a game by myself. And yeah, let's keep going. It's going to be a long video, folks. Sorry.
Developer experience to me is looking at like the PS5 and Xbox chips are very similar, right? But the ones that interest me is what incompatibility do they have at the software level? Like what decisions do they make? For example, like a lot of consoles had file system encryption because they're worried people are going to jailbreak their console. And that like slows a lot of things down from the dev side, right? Like,
yeah,
Nintendo's obsessed with DRM right now.
Like your last console just got hacked. Are you going to be incredibly paranoid now and potentially slow things down with, you know, security processor and encryption? And I mean, with all these modern consoles, they go crazy with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think they go overboard with that shit. I genuinely feel that way. I genuinely feel like, Nintendo, you need to quit freaking out. Most people who pirate your shit are never going to buy it to begin with most of the time. I don't know. I feel like it's a bad move. Especially if it hinders the software and everything, and it hinders everything. So, that's why there's constantly updates to the Switch, and they have next to no information about the updates. It's just about stability. It's because they're trying to improve the functionality going on in it. They're trying to improve it because it's, you know, initially very slow because of, you know, they're trying to make it work better while still doing its job and protecting, you know, everything from hackers and whatnot. It's ridiculous. And hackers will always find a way, Nintendo. That's the other thing. And I don't know if Nintendo's watching this. They will always find a way. You are basically wasting your time and frustrating everybody else by doing this shit. Your best course of action is to go to court like you've been doing. Take people to court. That's your best course of action. Take people to court. If they start hacking and doing all this shit to your current piece of hardware, take their goddamn asses to court like you've been doing. Sitting there and hindering your hardware and making things difficult for developers is not the answer. It is not the way. It is not the way. Let's keep going.
So you have weird restrictions, like for our game, you have mods. A lot of file systems say we're going to pre-allocate, say, 20 gigs of data, and if you need 25 gigs, too bad, right? And there's kind of restrictions of the ones that really get me, at least my game personally, as a problem. Right, and so even if they took the Steam Deck and said, we're taking the exact chip, we're just going to add Nintendo OS on it, it might actually be worse in some ways if they've made mistakes or design decisions at the at the software level, and that's it.
Yeah, he definitely has like a speech impediment. It's very hard to understand him sometimes. He sounds English, but he also sounds like he has difficulties with some of his wordings. Like, so there are times I'm sitting here listening to him, going, "What is he saying?" Because usually I can understand a Brit. I can usually understand Brits perfectly well. I mean, I grew up watching Monty Python, Benny Hill, of course, Doctor Who, and a lot of stuff from the BBC and everything. So I'm used to that accent, but he has got something going on here. Because I've heard my cousin used to kind of sound like that, so he had to go to speech class to help him pronunciate.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, the way I'd put it is better GPU than the Steam Deck, probably compatible memory system, or comparable, I should say, memory system, and a CPU that is overall less good at running games, but I guess could fit at 30 hertz probably as well as the Steam Deck. This piece of content is brought to you by Jawa.gg. Jawa's mission is to be given how long Nintendo has stretched out the life of the Switch, what would make your must-haves, should-haves, and could-haves in a list of features for the Switch 2 if Nintendo planned to have it match or exceed the Switch 1's lifespan? I think that directly brings into the question, like what I've described, do you think it can at least last as long as the Switch? And let's remember, the Switch didn't run, I mean, Hogwarts, like, has to load every 10 feet you walk. Now, so I'm not saying it was perfect, but do you think what I've described sounds like they're off to a better start than they were with the Switch, or is it the same for the time?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a lot better. It is going to be dependent on more of a software side on, for me, like if PS5 Pro is coming out, for example, Xbox going to have a console? Is this going to be like a bit of a weird generation where there's a PS5 Pro 6% faster?
Yeah, his I'm happy to sit here and listen carefully because of his unusual speech patterns and his weird to his, I don't know. I'm not trying to be a dick, but it helps to be able to understand a person to see their point of view.
Kind of like similar to a Steam Deck. Xbox kind of has nothing, and games are kind of at a stall where Switch can actually potentially outlast and be fine in this weird generation. Right?
Well, let me ask you this. This is a question I'd love to ask developers. The Steam Deck should have, it's not Steam Deck, the Switch 2 should have at least 12 gigabytes of RAM. The Series S has 10 gigabytes. Could that be a nail in the coffin on the Series S?
Yeah, we've had some RAM problems on the Series S before, and obviously if you cat games at a high resolution, it can...
Nintendo, 16 gigs. Do it. Make it happen. Don't fuck around. We have a saying in Texas, fuck around and find out. If you fuck around, you're going to find out. Don't fuck around. Basically means you do stupid and bad things happen.
But that 10 gigs is shared still, right? So really, you only might get like 5 or 6 gigs actual, and the GPU's using a whole bunch, right? So, I mean, Xbox recently announced they let developers to use 10 gig before you can only use like 9 gig or whatever, because the operating system was actually taking up a whole bunch of RAM, right? Kind of reserving.
That's going to slow down its multitasking, though. I mean, I'm having flashbacks to the PS3 and 360 era where I feel like every 6 months they gave a little more RAM to developers.
And I hope Moore's Law doesn't mind me basically watching and reacting to this. I hope he doesn't get too pissed off. I hope. This is from August 6th. Wait, what's today? It's the 8th. So that was like 2-3 days ago, something like that.
But by the end of the generation, the PS3 was like unusable in the PlayStation Store.
Yeah, for example, the thing that interests me is the original Xbox, kind of call it the Xbox VCR, right? The Xbox One VCR.
It just got real difficult to understand what he just said. Very, very difficult to understand. And keep in mind, I can understand a lot of accents. I can understand plenty of people. I understand thick Asian accents. I understand more or less, I understand a lot of thick accents. And so with him, it's not something I've heard before because it's not so much an accent as a difficulty with pronunciations. So some of his pronunciations are not not well off.
64 megabytes of extremely fast RAM, and then kind of the rest was slower RAM. It's kind of a weird architectural design decision. And so if you had some render targets that could fit within that 64 megabytes, the game ran really fast. And then the moment you added like, a couple of bytes over, now it's running extremely slow. So I'd be curious to see if it's RAM all unified.
Yeah, and that is exactly why I was saying about having plenty of resources on hand for both your operating system and the other, and also why I was saying that operating system APIs, so on and so forth, they matter. If you optimize them well enough, you can give more to the games. So the less resources your operating system requires, the more that you can hand over and give over to the, to the actual software for, the game and everything that's playing. These things matter when it comes to technology. They very much matter. I sometimes feel like there are YouTubers that it's out of their element to talk about technology, even though they do talk about it. I'm looking at Rich. I'm not looking at these guys. These guys clearly know what the hell they're talking about. So, yeah.
So running at the same speed, do they make these trade-offs where they have like more of it be faster or not?
I think it's unified. It's a unified 12 gigabytes. So I don't think that's a thing to worry about.
Yeah, so that would definitely be nice from a speed standpoint, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think 12 gigs, if Series S only has 10 gigs, 12 gigs is going to be enough for running a small resolution, for sure.
It just depends on what they're doing with the operating system and the APIs and such. It depends on that. How much memory is going to all of that? That's what matters.
Do you think, but my question on that is kind of like, how do you think devs will target optimization? Because the way I hear it is, actually the Xbox Series S has outsold the X like 3 or 4 to 1. And so in reality, what they're doing is they're building a game for PS5 first, and then they're porting it to Series S, and then seeing what settings they can turn up, which is meaning that the Series X, which already has issues because it has split memory, so you really want to develop on that first to optimize it. It's just kind of not getting the optimization you would hope it would. I don't know if it deserves, but you would hope it would get. When a Switch 2 comes out, which I'm going to guess is going to outsell the Series S, call me crazy.
Yeah.
How will developer...
Pricing matters. Pricing matters. You can't sit there and say it'll outsell. You can't just give something quality to people and expect them to buy it based on quality. You'll pay whatever because of the quality. You'll pay whatever for the experience. No, people are going to be very careful with their hard-earned money. We're already seeing a huge dip in current Switch being sold because people are, and here's the other thing that gets me. Nintendo, you're not going to release a Switch 2 Lite, are you? And for that matter, why would you not release a home console only version? I would love that. I don't take my Switch anywhere. My Switch stays docked. I don't play it really on the go. They could have released a less expensive basic home console, basically. Wow, that was a bassy fart, a bassy burp. Jesus. Oh, ooh, wow. Oh, so yeah, these things matter. These things very much matter.
Just plan on optimizing their engines when they know that the most popular system, the PS5, at least for now, we'll see how well the Switch 2 sells, could outsell, of course, has 16 gigs. Then we have a 12 gig console, and then we have a 10 gig console with the smallest install base. I'm just wondering how much that could be like a headwind for them.
Yeah, well,
okay, I didn't mean to speed through that. 10 gigs, wow. Nintendo, like, I didn't even know the PlayStation 5 had that much, and I still didn't know that the PlayStation 5 was outselling anything. Oh, I feel like it's a nail in the coffin. That's one of the things that Microsoft is struggling with, too, I think. I don't think multiple versions of consoles is a good idea. I think that's a bad idea. I'm also trying to figure out, you know that there's optical discs that exist now, new optical disc standards. Well, no, they're not standards. I don't think they're standards yet. But there's new optical discs being developed that hold an assload of data. or data, or however you want to pronounce it. It holds an ass load. And we're just kind of throwing our hands up in the air, basically using, on the PlayStations and Xboxes, the discs don't hold all the information. You have to do huge ass updates on the internet, So I think they really do, even though they could go to a new format of disc that holds superior amounts of data, they don't do it because they want that control. They want digital only because they want control over that. Oh, man.
RGLI has 16 gigs, right? So I feel like they could have pushed it up a little bit more because I guess the thing.
Well, it's Nintendo. I'm told they could choose 16 gigs to be clear. I guess they still could. I have a suspicion it's 12.
I hope it's not. I hope it's 16. I hope if you're smart, it's 16 gigs. But of course they could, again, release something with more memory later. But then there's, like I said, optimization matters. All these other things matter. There's a lot of variables. And if we're not taking these other variables into account, I think that's a mistake. So, I'm just saying, that's a mistake.
Yeah, I guess they want to cut down the price, right? The thing that also scares me about the Switch porting is developers are still going to want to release games for the Switch One. I mean, it's got like how many units? 60 million or something?
It's insane.
Yeah. So the Switch One's kind of like this low end phone tablet kind of thing, and you're saying the next one's going to have the Steam Deck. So you're taking a PS5 Pro game, you're saying, hey, we're going to downport it to the Switch. We're going to have to make cuts, like all the texture size is going to be halved. If they start doing stuff like nanite and ray tracing and any of these crazy technologies, you can
that's
see
just not
that
going to run on the Switch.
You can see that stuff's going to struggle, right? And
we don't know if there's not going to be ray tracing or not. We don't know. Like, there's still stuff that are very much unknowns, and we're acting like we know. I've been seeing people on Twitter acting like they know. Like, bitch, you don't know. We know nothing official from Nintendo. There's been no formal announcement. The hardware's not out. There's nothing. Nothing to go on. So stop talking like you know all these other things. You don't know. There's a lot of unknowns. A lot of variables that we don't know yet that have to be considered. So don't assume it. There could very much be some form of ray tracing on there. We won't call it ray tracing because that's a... Wait, can we call it ray tracing? I don't know. But, yeah, I'm pretty sure it could exist. Vulkan has a version of ray tracing. It only works with certain hardware because it has to be beefy enough, but I don't know. We'll see.
Game devs will probably do what they're currently doing, which is upscale from very, very low resolution, game looks blurry. On Switch, for example, we turn on anti-aliasing, so you've got a lot of side effect problems there, right? I think for us, we have to lower texture size and stuff like that, but there's also the weird restriction that Nintendo comes up with, like, your patch size can't be too big. If your patch size is too big, your game gets rejected, kind of thing.
That's retarded. That's very retarded. Do you think Steam has that? Fuck no. There is no patch size restrictions for patches, or size restriction on patches on Steam. Doesn't fucking exist. I don't even think it fucking exists with PlayStation or Microsoft. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Man.
So I wonder if the hardware is actually going to be fine, but the software or the policy around the console is going to be the one that holds it back.
Yeah, it does feel like in the past, too, even when they had faster hardware, or like they just still would make these decisions like friend codes and like bizarre decision making around the Wii U's launch, where it's just like, you gotta start acting like a modern game company, with how you approach some of this stuff.
That's what I'm talking about when I say that Nintendo, you are in a bubble, Nintendo. Bust the fucking bubble. Leave the bubble. Acknowledge the outside world. Stop doing this shit. That's why I keep hoping once the older generation is phased out, the newer generation comes in, and the newer generation's just like, yeah, we're going to do things more modern, Come into the current day, Nintendo. It's not the 80s and 90s anymore. It's like you're coming slowly, but you're kicking and screaming. Stop doing that.
these companies, we have this with a lot of the companies, right? But Xbox is very open. They're like, you can take any kit and convert it into a dev kit kind of thing. You've got dev mode. You've got, I mean, we have a beta version of a game that people can run with an Insider program, but on PlayStation, Switch, all that stuff's locked down, right? So a lot of the how good of a game can you make might be limited to the devs. Like, for example, one big problem on Switch, and I think this is public, so I talk about it, is Nintendo's worried you're going to wear out the flash storage of the console, right? Like, if your game writes too much data, you're going to be hurting the SD card, or you're going to be hurting the NAND on the console. So they have very restrictions of, like, you can't write too many times, and you can't do this, and this whole system encryption is going to work like that, and those kind of restrictions hold back a lot of games more than the hardware does. And we have an Android phone, for example, that can load a terabyte of mods, and the Switch, struggles and has to do buckets, can only do 10 mods and stuff like that. And that's purely software restrictions.
I gotta wonder, like, how much of that's a legitimate worry. Like, because I guess it's Flash, right? It's not.
Yeah, they're like paranoid. Like, if Intel was paranoid about overclocking their CPUs too much, Nintendo's, extremely paranoid about. It's just seeming like the Joy-Con drift they don't care that much about, but the flash storage they are like, it's almost like on the Wii they got burned somehow from flash storage and now they're super paranoid about it. But those restrictions are coming. Yeah, that's the one that scared me the most.
Well, so all right, you mentioned Intel and overclocking, so I think that's a perfect time for us to pivot to that conversation here.
Okay. And that's it. That's everything about the that they talked about the Nintendo Switch 2. Yeah, the question of if it's future-proof for AAA. And he's right. He brought up a lot of great points. Here's the thing when it comes to Nintendo. You make weird decisions. You're paranoid. You act weird about shit. It's very off-putting, not just to developers, but to, not just to the people who are developing the game, but to the third parties, the people who head these studios, the people that own these studios. Is it worth it to fuck around, That's why I feel like you got to do this right. Are you going to do this right? That remains to be seen. I think that remains to be seen on a grand scale, really, because we know how you are, Nintendo, and it's part of you just being stuck in the past and not acknowledging the outside world. We're going to see. We're going to see how it goes. I'm not saying it's going to be dead on arrival, but I think you shouldn't frustrate developers. I think you need to stop. Nintendo and Apple are very similar about development, not being able to use just any development kit. Like, they have their shit, That's why the folks who work on Pixel Game Maker, like, if they want to publish your game on the Switch, they're like, yeah, we're going to have to do that ourselves because we have to use a kit that we have to make sure your game is running well, and we might have to make adjustments ourselves to get this game running well on the Switch for Nintendo to okay it and whatnot. So that's why you can't use our software and directly put it on the Switch or whatever. So, yeah. Okay. Wow. That was a lot to go over. So that was interesting. That was quite the, and what brought this on was this, and they were talking about, Nintendo Switch 2 could be more or less on par with the Steam Deck, but software limitations could impact the system performance heavily. That's what they were talking about. When they say software restrictions, they mean the software limitations that Nintendo does because of paranoia about things. So, there we go. And this was a long-ass video, and I apologize for those of you who sat through it. I thank you very much. It's very appreciated. Rate, comment, subscribe. I really am. I have 100 subscribers to go to get to 1,000, man. That's amazing. And I still feel like people are still subscribing over specific content, but man, it is encouraging when you do subscribe. That's the other reason you should subscribe. Rate, comment, subscribe, because your subscription really helps me want to keep going. You subscribing to my channel makes me go, this is worthwhile. This is worth doing. If people weren't subscribing, I'd be like, this is not worth it. This is not worth jack squat. And anyhow, this has been the Goof Rate. I already said all that. This has been the Goof. Y'all have a good one. For those who sat all the way through this, tell me, this will tell me that you watched it all the way through. Tell me your thoughts exactly on if Nintendo should get their asses out of the bubble. Just respond with, they got to get their asses out of the bubble. That's going to tell me you watched it all the way through. Have a good one.